Let's take you back to the capital city now, where President Cyril Ramaphosa is today expected to address the opening session of the 2022 Heads of Mission Conference. And this, of course, a platform for discussion among South Africa's internationally deployed senior diplomats. And it's taking place at the Department of International Relations and Cooperation Head Office in Pretoria. And the South African envoys are being briefed on the strategic objectives of the current administration. Let's take you there. Khayelihle Khumalo is there with the Minister of DIRCO, Dr. Naledi Pandor. So, Khaya, hopefully we've taken care of those glitches with regard to sound. It's over to you.
Well, that's right, Lebo. So there's a warm reception here as the heads of mission, of course, say they're waiting keenly for the president to address them. So we're going to continue with our chat with the minister. So there's quite a lot of issues really to be looked upon here. You talk also about the continental free trade area. So this is one of the game changers for the continent in terms of boosting trade, looking at making sure that economic integration really becomes a reality. But of course, the minister does join us, Lebo, just to look at other issues. You know that South Africa is a very key player when it comes to the multilateral affairs, Minister. We've seen South Africa's team very busy in New York in terms of the motions, the resolutions presented. Tell us just a bit more about the importance of South Africa's role, especially when it comes to peacekeeping, peacemaking, and all these important objectives when it comes to our foreign policy.
Well, Khayelihle, I think South Africa has a very strong commitment to achieving peace, because we sincerely believe that with peace comes development. So we've always, in the context of the multilateral bodies, argued for a focus on peace and security. And we've been very concerned that we're not seeing the United Nations being utilized as the premier global multilateral institution to advance peace and security. In fact, for several years, we have argued for the reform of the United Nations. And I think the recent events that are unfolding in Russia and Ukraine are an indicator of the need to really strengthen the United Nations, give it much more of a role in promoting peace and security, and re-looking at the UN Security Council, and especially the role of the most powerful countries in the context of that Security Council.
Just look at how South Africa has voted, Minister, in the UN General Assembly. We saw recently where you abstained when it comes to the resolution that was presented in light of the raging conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And one of the fundamental bases that you presented was the issue of saying the resolution was not creating a conducive environment for a dialogue to take place. Do you mind just sharing with us just the importance of that, Minister, just as a player in that space?
South Africa has been arguing that there should be a stronger focus on negotiations and diplomatic processes. We've argued for a stronger role, for example, for the UN Secretary General as the global envoy for peace. He's been totally marginalized in this process. And what you have seen is really that the protagonists are utilizing the United Nations, particularly the General Assembly, almost as an additional armor against Russia. We don't think this will lead to peace, and this is why we've really insisted as South Africa that rather than resolutions that label, that name call, and that criticize Russia, which we do as well, because we believe the conflict and the deaths are something that should not be happening. We're against war. We're against any form of harm, particularly to civilians, any destruction of territory of another country. All of these points we've made clear. However, we've said what we should adopt should be resolutions or processes that will result in peace.
And just also, Minister, looking at how South Africa is perceived in the international community. Let us look at the recent events that we have seen in the country. We've seen the emergence of Operation Dudula and many other campaigns as well that at times can be perceived to be very anti-foreigner, especially when it comes to the black African migrant. As the international relations, how are you going to engage your diplomats so that they try perhaps to present a context why we're seeing the emergence of such engagements, as it were?
I hope that our ambassadors, wherever they are informing particularly the leadership of African countries that South Africa as a people are not a xenophobic people, and that we are committed to treating all those who reside in our country with respect and dignity. I think it's really tragic that some members of our communities have felt that they should rise up in the way that Operation Dudula is doing, because all that results in is vigilante violence eventually. It may seem like a very good civil movement, but eventually the targeting of foreign black people will result in violence that we've seen in previous incidents against African people from other African countries. I think South Africa should share with the world that it is a country that is welcoming. There are challenges with illegal migration, and I think we need to address this matter of undocumented migrants in our country, but addressing that does not mean we rise up in hatred and violence. This does not present a positive picture of our country.
And another very critical issue, Minister, will have to be what you've seen in Mozambique, how SADC has been involved in terms of repelling attacks, terror attacks, that is, and also how South Africa has been at the forefront as the chairperson when it comes to the organ of peace, security and security cooperation. Tell us about how is the SADC mission dealing with that problem. We know that that's a very key part of Mozambique. When you talk about economic development, the gas exploration, among other things, those are very important elements there. But how is the SADC mission doing in Cabo Delgado?
Well, the incursion of terrorists into Mozambique, I think, is one of the biggest threats to the security of the Southern African region. And it is for this reason that SADC decided to take the extraordinary step of establishing a mission from our armed forces that would go into the northern region of Cabo Delgado and seek to repel these terrorists, because we don't want them to spread into any other country in the region, nor into other parts of the continent. We've seen the damage and terrible toll of life that has been caused by terrorists in the Sahel, the north of West Africa. So we are determined as SADC that we are going to repel these terrorists. We'll continue the fight against them because we must get them out of our country, our neighboring country's territory, and we must resolutely indicate to them that we, as Southern Africa, will not tolerate terrorists. And I must say, I'm proud of the men and women in uniform who have courageously dedicated themselves to this battle. They have had some success, but it's a tough battle. As you know, terrorists are funded from elsewhere. They have money, they have modern weaponry, and they're able to fool local communities into working with them because they create this notion that they will create a better system of administration or governance and provide opportunity to local communities. So I'm glad that the government of Mozambique has developed a reconstruction and development program for that community to ensure that the community knows that the government is with them and that they will enjoy opportunity, and also to educate the people about extremists and how essentially, despite all the myths that they wish to promote, they are a force that is negative. and we will continue to combat them with that in mind.
And just once again, Minister, looking at the root causes of terrorism, obviously it's about economic exclusion, it's about young people being disgruntled. But now we've seen that you're trying to source funds to empower women in that part of Mozambique, the youth, making sure that they are involved when it comes to economic development. Recently, you announced that you receive funds through the EU via the AU Peace and Security, the facility that is enabling peace to flourish in the continent. But tell us about other engagements that you're having, perhaps to try and garner as much as possible to make sure that Cabo Delgado once again becomes a thriving area economically.
Well, really, the primary task lies with the government of Mozambique. But firstly, I want to quarrel with you about the notion of terrorists being about economic development. They're not. They're about abuse. Women are raped. Community members are beheaded. There are awful murders committed by terrorists. Terrorists are terrorists. They create terror in communities. They destroy property. They don't feed communities. They actually are a force of evil. And so I think we shouldn't, by any means, create an impression that terrorist groups enter in order to support some form of freedom or liberation struggle. They are really a negative force against communities. So as I say, we are working with the Mozambique government in the initiatives of reconstruction. We've agreed that we will support initiatives in the agricultural space to enhance food security. There's been significant displacement of community members from land that they were previously farming. We will work with the Mozambique government to see how we can assist in order to restore people's return to land and use of land for purposes of commercial and subsistence agriculture.
And just, Minister, going back to the issue of the tensions between the South Africans and mainly African migrants, currently there's a massive protest in Diepsloot, north of Johannesburg, and I believe there has been some fatalities reported. As South Africa's top diplomat, what do you say perhaps in making sure that there is coexistence so that South Africans understand why we have migrants in this country, but also in the same vein, making sure that as a country we're able to regularize the stay of those who come to our shores? How do we address this issue of migration?
The matter of migration and ensuring we regularize administration of immigration is something that government is addressing. We have to document everybody who's in the country. I must say I admire the people of South Africa because we've never had separate communities of Africans from elsewhere living in a refugee camp. We've always allowed those who come into our country to live within the community. So we now have to address the dissatisfaction that community members have. They're feeling that they're displaced in certain sectors of the economy, particularly the leisure sector. And I think this is something that must be addressed. In the retail sector, many of our community members, and particularly young people, feel that they don't get jobs. So I do think as a government, you have to listen to the people. But you cannot tolerate violence against any person. And this is something that must be combated, because all we will do is reify the notion that we're a violent people and that we don't welcome black immigrants to our country. And so we'll be cast as being anti-African, which cannot be our posture because we are Africans. We also must work with countries from which we receive many immigrants and persuade them as well that they must strengthen their economies and create opportunities for their people. However, you're never going to stop movement. When we were repatriating in the COVID-19's worst days, we had over 300,000 South Africans out of the country. We had hundreds of thousands of foreigners here who wanted to go back to their homes. So you're not going to stop movement. What you must do is manage it properly so that the advantages of the mix that there must be between peoples is appreciated by South Africans. At the moment, many, particularly in our poor communities, see it as a negative. We have to turn that around, work at improving our own management of the process, but also work at convincing communities that it's not a negative to welcome those from elsewhere.
And just, Minister, reflecting on the very key theme of this gathering, it's around positioning South Africa's diplomacy in a post-COVID-19 era. How significant is that, especially because it's been very hard for the diplomats in terms of making sure that they do meet Pretoria's objectives in light of an array of restrictions that you have seen imposed trying to save lives, but now how do they try and make sure that they reposition themselves? The issue of the economic diplomacy as well, something that is absolutely key, Minister.
I hope our diplomats will get to understand what some of the challenges we face are and begin to think of how in the countries in which they represent us, they may derive opportunities for South Africa. So from some countries in Europe, due to their investments in South Africa, we have over 40,000 jobs, and this is fantastic. We want to increase that to 80,000. So we've got to get more companies to establish plants in our country and create more jobs for our people. So it is our diplomats who will be our voice, articulating those goals that we have as the people of South Africa. The second part is that the President has announced that the COVID restrictions are now lifted, just a few remain. So I think let's get back to living, really. Let the diplomats get working. Meetings are now permissible. Most countries have lifted restrictions. So nobody should be sitting in their office waiting for someone to knock on their door. All of us. I know we love the virtual meetings because we can stay at home, etc. But let's start living. Let's start communicating. Let's start engaging. That's the message that we want to convey to our diplomats. And through the information we provide, we give them the platform from which to launch that living.
Just before I let you go, Minister, the issue of energy security. We saw at the recent investment conference where President Ramaphosa emphasized the issue of making sure that we stabilize that area to be able to boost investment, to attract FDIs, among other things. How important is that issue in as far as South Africa is concerned to make sure that our grid is not constrained?
Well, I mean, it's absolutely critical. We are an industrialized country. We have an economy that requires energy in order to thrive. And so the matter of energy security has to be a top priority for South Africa. And for me, I believe there's amazing opportunity in the renewable space. In fact, I think the entire green economy, waste management, the ocean economy, just the environment and the economic opportunities that lie within it is something that we should take far more seriously than we may be doing. I'm excited at a number of the initiatives that we have. I think the model of bringing in solar and wind energy opportunities, looking much more at hydro, and looking at more modern nuclear energy resources are exciting developments for South Africa. And I'm sure these men and women living in countries that have already advanced in these areas are going to bring a great deal of fantastic advice to South Africa.
Minister, so we're just going to stop for now. So obviously, Sakina, there's quite a lot of issues to explore during the course of the morning. We'll hope to speak to the diplomats about their experiences. And of course, it's a very unprecedented occasion where they are all here to listen to the marching orders from Pretoria, but also making sure that they prioritize the country's local priorities and make sure that they are able to champion South Africa's objectives wherever they are deployed. So for now, I'm going to take it back to the studio.
Well, thank you so much, Khayelihle Khumalo from Pretoria there. And we'll cross back to him a little later on in the show. And he's at the DIRCO headquarters for a very important session, as he said there, to take South Africa's deployed diplomats and give them their marching orders as to how to proceed in terms of not just selling the country, but making sure that our message is put out clearly in the international arena.